Welcome back, my friends. Currently, we're on day 211 of Russia's disastrous invasion of Ukraine. And for Vladimir Putin, at this point, it's all or nothing. Putin has chosen escalation of this war, the successful rapid counteroffensive of Ukrainian troops in the Kharkiv direction has turned the tide of war against Russia, and Russia knows it. So Putin is forced to either abandon his plans to seize Ukraine or else announce a mobilization and intensify military operations. Putin has chosen the second option despite the inherent risks. And I think it's important to remember Russian history, and Russia has only mobilized for war 3 times: World War I, World War II, and Putin's special limited military operation that shouldn't last longer than 3 to 7 days. And let's look at the track record of their prior mobilizations. And it's important to remember that Russia lost World War I. They withdrew from the conflict before the surrender of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. For Russia in World War I, it ended with the collapse of their government and the deposing of Tsar Nicholas II. The entire Romanov family was murdered, and Russia went into revolution. And for World War II, they only won that conflict because of the aid and support being offered to them from the Allies. On the US Embassy's website in Russia, they like to remind the Russians of everything that the Allies, and specifically the United States, did under the Lend-Lease Act to supply the Soviet Union. So here's all the stuff that America gave to the Russians during World War II so they could fight the war against Germany. 400,000 jeeps and trucks, 14,000 airplanes, 8,000 tractors, 13,000 tanks, 1.5 million blankets, 15 million pairs of army boots, 107,000 tons of cotton, 2.7 million tons of petrol products, and 4.5 million tons of food. Do you really think the Soviet Union could have defeated Nazi Germany without all of this stuff given to them by the United States under the Lend-Lease Act? So going back to their World War II track record, it's important to remember that this time the Lend-Lease Act is being used in Ukraine's favor, and a torrent of materials and weapons and supplies are currently being processed and on their way to Ukraine. The level of supports that Ukraine is receiving is only going to intensify, not diminish. So how is this going to play out for Putin mobilizing his population for his special limited military operation? And I'm inclined to think that it's going to have a World War I ending with the collapse of his government and some kind of political revolution in Russia. So after Putin's speech declaring the mobilization 2 days ago, Ministry of Defense Sergei Shoigu went on the news and announced that in 7 months of fighting, Russia has only lost 5,937 soldiers, which is why they need an extra 300,000 men. Now, the Ukrainians are claiming that greater than 50,000 soldiers fighting for Russia have been killed so far in this conflict. Russia is only admitting to about 6,000. But if you've only lost 6,000 troops, what the heck do you need 300,000 more soldiers for? Additionally, with this number, this is a total fabrication. We already know that Russia lies about their numbers. So when they announced a partial mobilization, the Russian government can do whatever they want. If they want to call up and mobilize 500,000 soldiers, they can do that. 700,000, 1 million. It doesn't matter because nobody in Russia can independently confirm what the government is doing. So they're just saying 300,000, but I think more than likely it's going to be a greater number. And here's the problem for Putin. Yes, Russia can mobilize 300,000 men. Yes, they can send them to Ukraine. But can Russia equip them? No. Can Russia winter clothe them? Can Russia supply them once they get there? Can Russia keep these men alive as winter is approaching both Ukraine and Russia? And like all great leaders who ignore logistics, this is only going to end one way for the Russian military this winter. And Putin's mobilization, these men are just going to be used as cannon fodder because Putin doesn't have enough modern equipment to supply these soldiers to make them effective in combat against the Ukrainians. Russia does not have already enough ballistic vests, Kevlar helmets, gun optics, digital radios, night vision, winter boots or jackets, not even tents for these men to sleep in, as they will be sleeping outside in the wintertime. So Putin is just raising a bunch of low morale, badly trained World War II style infantry. And for those of these guys who don't get HIMARSed on their way to the front, they will either starve or freeze until Putin sends them over the top to be exterminated by proximity fused artillery and M30A1 GMLRS rockets. The more and faster these drafted Russian soldiers die, the faster their relatives will wake up and rise up and overthrow Putin's regime. There's also been a political shift in Europe, specifically from Macron and Scholz. Breaking news, Macron urges world to put maximum pressure on Putin. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz calls Russia's invasion imperialism at the UN General Assembly. I think for these EU leaders like Scholz and Macron, they were always willing to allow for a diplomatic, or I think the term used was an honorable way for Putin to withdraw from Ukraine and remain in power. But because Russia has mobilized their population for war, I think these EU leaders now realize there is no ending this war with honor. There is no ending this war peacefully. Putin is threatening European and global security actively with nuclear weapons. US President Biden at the UN said this: "If nations can pursue their imperial ambitions without consequences, then we put at risk everything this very institution stands for. You cannot seize a nation's territory by force, then claim it's yours and say you can use nuclear weapons in self-defense." Because that's exactly what Russia is doing. They've used their military to seize Kherson, seize Zaporizhia. They're now having sham elections claiming this is now Russian territory, we annexed it. And as a nuclear power, we now have the right to invoke self-defense to defend Russian territory. Nuclear weapons have been around for 80 years, and no nuclear power has ever done this. Use their military to seize territory, say that territory is ours, and then claim they have the right in self-defense to use nuclear weapons to keep it. The West is not going to tolerate this. So Kyiv is urging the West to spell out exactly how it would respond to a Russian nuclear strike. This is what Putin is threatening to do. Ukrainian officials have called on world leaders to issue a firm warning to Putin, making it clear that any attempt to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine would result in catastrophic consequences for Russia. So the nuclear powers in NATO are the UK, France, and the United States. And I don't see them, one, announcing what they'll do. I think they want the Russian military to use their imagination of what the response will be. But two, if Russia does use a nuke, I don't even think NATO would respond with a nuke because they don't want it to escalate with Russia using more nukes. So if Putin does use a nuclear weapon, a tactical nuke, the rumor I'm hearing is that NATO would just instantly sink every ship in Russia's Black Sea fleet. NATO has the capability of doing this. I also imagine things would get very bad in Kaliningrad for the Russian forces there. But these are scary times. This is very serious. What Russia and Putin is doing and claiming at the moment, this is the greatest threat to world security we've faced since World War II. So how are the Russian people handling all this with mobilization to support Putin's imperial ambitions? Lots of pictures and videos at the Russian border. This is the border between Russia and Georgia with Russian citizens trying to get out. There's also lots of pictures and videos at the Finnish border claiming there's a long line of people trying to get into Finland, but Finland did issue a statement saying the media is incorrectly representing what's happening at the Finnish-Russian border and that border traffic is normal, so I'll take Finland's word for it and say that border traffic there is normal. But that doesn't mean the Finnish people want to welcome Russian draft dodgers. 70% of Finnish people want to stop issuing visas to Russians to allow them into their country. It's up to the government if they want to act on this 70% position that Russians should stop being allowed in. The Freedom of Russia Legion has published information on how their supporters can avoid mobilization. This includes encouraging them to get jobs in Russia and critical infrastructure, or else just burn down military registration offices and destroy records. The Freedom of Russia Legion is the Russian fighters in Ukraine fighting for Ukraine against Russia to hopefully at some point take down Vladimir Putin. Additionally, ordinary Russians have to take to the streets. They have to rise up. Russians over the last 2 days have been protesting. Several hundred people have been detained across Russia on Wednesday as rallies against military mobilization declared by Putin for the war in Ukraine took place in areas from the Far East to the capital in Moscow. But we're not quite there yet. Realistically, we need critical masses of crowds in the hundreds, and these protesters need to not be afraid of the police. So here's a single riot police officer scaring away a crowd of several dozens. If you want a successful protest in Russia, you got to be able to handle one overweight riot cop. Additionally, I think Russians are a little paranoid that even amongst their own, there are plainclothes undercover officers. So here is a police officer in plain clothes being apprehended, and then he has to explain who he is. So there you go, pat on the back, he's one of us. Russia's secret police are hard at work right now trying to weed out dissidents or anyone opposed to Putin's war in Ukraine. So to get a critical mass to overthrow a dictator, overthrow a government, Ukraine demonstrated what you need to do just 8 years ago. Here is a scene of a Ukrainian protest against their government in Kyiv from 2014. That is absolutely incredible, very inspiring. And it also is important to remember that the Russians who are coming out now to protest are protesting against mobilization. They're not protesting the genocide of Ukrainians. They're not protesting the rape of Ukrainian women and children. They're not protesting the occupation of an independent state. They're not protesting the torture of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians. They're just protesting the fact that they might actually have to fight and die in Putin's war. So there are lots of young Russian men of military age just a week ago who were on Team Z, and now they want to sing "Give Peace a Chance." They're actually starting to reconsider Putin's special military operation. And for Russians panicking about mobilization 7 months into this war, this is pretty fascinating. Did they not know that their country started the bloodiest war in Europe since World War II? Were they really hoping not to be personally affected by it? Did they really think that only poor Russians and minorities would be the only ones sent to die in war? And we're only 2 days into mobilization, but we're already getting videos of Russian reservists being called to recruitment centers to get on buses. They're starting their journey to Ukraine today. Here's a couple clips I want to share with you. So these men, they look like they're in their 40s and 50s, and this man himself doesn't look like he's in particularly good shape. I'm sure the older you get, the more you have health complications. This is not looking good for Russia. Here's another video of reservists reporting to the pickup stations to be put on buses, and they're saying goodbye to their families. These men are going to die. They're never going to see their families again. When I see a clip like this, the only thing I can think of is, wow, propaganda works. These men are completely brainwashed if they're willing to get on a bus and participate in Putin's wars of imperialism. I don't understand why they wouldn't resist, why they wouldn't choose to be arrested and sent to jail rather than getting on that bus and going to the front lines in Ukraine. On some level, these men must believe that Ukraine and Europe is full of Nazis and they're the good guys and they have to do this, but holy cow, Russia is a very, very sad place. Let's now pivot and talk about good news for Ukraine, as Ukraine finally found use for Viktor Medvedchuk. This was Putin's unofficial representative in the Ukrainian government, and he was captured trying to flee Ukraine in early spring. He was exchanged 2 days ago along with 50 Russian POWs for 205 Ukrainian POWs. So if this exchange is 1-for-1, then this man was worth 155 Ukrainian POWs. That's how badly Russia and Vladimir Putin wanted to get him back. And included in the released Ukrainian prisoners of war were Azovstal defenders. This is incredible. Here's a picture of a Azovstal defender that went viral, and you can see he's on the bus. He is being released in this prisoner of war exchange. In addition, the photographer who took this picture of the light shining down on an Azovstal defender, he was also released along with many others. And part of this release, part of this deal, is that 5 of these Azov commanders are going to stay in Turkey under the protection of Erdogan until the war is over. So for the lower-ranking soldiers, they're just being exchanged, but the Azov commanders are going to remain in Turkey until the war is over. And this news is not being received well by Russian military vloggers. When Russia took the city of Mariupol, ideally thousands of Russian soldiers were killed or injured, and the Azov battalion was the one defending the city. And according to Russian propaganda, aren't these guys supposed to be hardcore Nazis who have been shelling the Donbass region? I don't have an answer for you here. I just think it's all very bizarre. I'm happy that Russia did release them. These men are heroes. But this contradicts Russian propaganda that these are all hardcore Nazis out to kill ethnic Russians in the Donbass region. Additionally, many have already seen the happy reaction of Ukrainians to the return home of Ukrainian prisoners of war. And nobody really cares who they were exchanged for. The main thing is that they got these soldiers home. But at the same time, the happy reaction of Russians to return Russian prisoners of war is nowhere to be seen. So for people who monitor Russian social media, there's nobody on Russian social media celebrating the return of their prisoners of war. Nobody cares about these prisoners of war or these Russian soldiers that they're getting back. They're just upset that Ukrainian Azov regiment members were exchanged. Nobody cares about these Russian soldiers fighting and dying on the front lines. It's all about hurting and punishing Ukraine as much as possible. But for today, in this video, let's wrap up by celebrating this prisoner exchange. Here is a 30-second clip of the exchange, and you can just see the look on the faces of these men, knowing that they're going to be returning home. It's absolutely incredible video.
Привіт, привіт, хлопці. Привіт, дорогенькі. Героям слава. Молодчаки. Да.
That's all for this update video. Glory to the heroes, glory to Ukraine. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support my channel. Comments or questions, let me know down below. Till the next video, take care, be safe.